And then we will move on to the ones where we have to do a little bit more factoring, like indicator 20. All right, so we have 3n squared minus 18n equals 0. So this one, again, we have two terms. So if you see something with two terms, just try to find something in common that we could split the n's. We don't know a way yet to solve with an n squared, so we're gonna take out that common factor so that way we have two n's to solve. So what do 3n squared and 18n have in common?
3.
A 3n. All right, so then you guys tell me 3n times what would give me 3n squared? Just an n, and 3n times what would give me negative 18n? And what kind of 6? Oh, a negative 6. Alright, so we have two factors here. The first factor is a 3n, and then the second factor is the n minus 6. So we want to find out what value of n here would give me 0 and what value of n here would give me 0. So if 3n is equal to 0, I want to get n by itself, I divide by 3. What's 0 divided by anything? 0. Alright, and then here, I take n minus 6, and I want to know what minus 6 equals 0. You can probably mentally tell me that that's a positive 6, or you can show your work and get 0 plus 6 is 6. So everything today is going to have two answers. So you guys got to tell me, what do you think so far? So far, so good? So our ultimate goal is to get two parentheses. Now, those examples right there are kind of a special case where we do the greatest common factor. The majority of the time you are just going to factor. It'll be the trinomials where we're going to have to figure out what multiplies to a certain number and adds to a certain number and factor that way. So everything today is going to have a coefficient of 1 to start with. Sorry, my throat's really scratchy. All right, here we go. Let me get a marker ready. All right, so on these, you will need to factor these. So here's our first example. We've got v squared plus 5v plus 6 equals 0. All right, so we always want to figure out what multiplies to the first term times the last term. So what number's here? We just never write it. All right, so 1 times 6. So I'm going to try to figure out what multiplies to 6 and what adds to 5. What two numbers do that? They multiply to 6 when they add to 5. 2 and 3. All right, so those are the two numbers we are going to use to split up 5v. So we have, instead of writing 5v, we're going to write 2v plus 3v, because 2 plus 3 gives me 5. Can't forget that equals 0. It's still part of the equation. And then once we split this up into 4 terms, we can do our groups. So what would be the common factor of v squared and 2v? V. If I take a v out of each one, I'm left with a v plus 2. Now what's the common factor here? A 3. If I take out a 3, 3, I'm left with v plus 2 as well. And whenever you're factoring, you guys should notice that these two parentheses, if you find the correct common factor, should always match. So that tells me that they have this in common of v plus 2, and then the remainder, the v and the 3, becomes our other factor. This is what you guys told me last week you were really, really good at, but not so much yesterday. So you will be required to do those factoring steps. You do have to show your work there. And then once we have it factored, we're going to do what we just did here. Once we have our two parentheses, we're going to figure out the values of v. So you guys tell me if I want to know what plus 2 gives me 0. What value of v plus 2 would give me 0 here? -2. And then for this factor, what value for v plus 3 gives me 0? -3. Now, I do want to let you guys know that tomorrow we will have coefficients here, but just not today. So we are going to go through those same steps of factoring. Again, if you need to rewatch those videos, that's what I would be doing this evening. But once you have those two factors, we can then find our two solutions. Right, let's do one more like this. We've got x squared minus x minus 42 equals 0. All right, so what do we want to try to multiply to? -42. Now, what are we going to add to, since this is just a minus x? What number is this really here? -1. All right, can you guys think of two numbers that multiply to -42 but add to a -1? -7 and +6, I agree with that. -7 times 6 is -42. -7 plus 6 gives you -1. That works. So those two numbers that we use, since they add to -1, we're going to split up -1 there. And I'm actually going to write it a little bit lower so it doesn't get in the way of that. So I now have x squared, but instead of -1, I'm going to write minus 7x plus 6x minus 42 equals 0. All right, so once we split it up here, I put them into groups and did common factors. So always just go one group at a time. The first two terms, what's the common thing between x squared and -7x? All right, what would I be left with after I take an x out? X minus 7. All right, what do these two have in common? And if I take out a 6 in each term, what am I going to have left? All right, do our two parentheses match? And if it's just a 6, always remember that is a positive 6. So since these two are in common, that's our first factor, and then our remainders there become our second factor. And we can solve. So we've got our first factor. What value minus 7 would give me 0? Positive 7. And last but not least, what value plus 6 gives me 0? -6. All right. I'm going to give you guys one like this to try. minus 16 equals 0. All right, guys, what did we figure out? What multiplies to negative 16 but adds to positive 6? 8 and negative 2. So whenever we do something like this, our x squared goes here. Now, does it matter which number you write first, the positive 8 or the negative 2? So I'm actually going to write my positive 8x here, and I'm going to write my negative 2x here, and then bring down my negative 16. Say it does not matter there. Whenever you do your common factors in groups, you're going to end up getting the same. It'll just be the opposite of my work. If you have your negative 2 first, it'll just look slightly different. So right here, x squared and 8x have an x in common, right? And I would take that out, and that'd be an x plus 8. Now, what do negative 2 and negative 16 have in common? All right, so I just want you to look at something. If I just put a 2 out here, I would have negatives left in my parentheses. Does this have a negative here? We want them to match. Typically, if this second number is negative, you're going to take a negative out. So if I take the negative 2 out with it, that would turn it into a positive. That would just be an x, right? And then what would be a negative 2 times what would give me a negative 16? Yep. We always want those to match. Those have to match to finish the problem. So make sure if you have a negative to take that out. So my x plus 8 is my match. And then my other 2 factors come from the x and the negative 2, so that's x minus 2. So my first factor, what plus 8 gives me 0? Negative 8. So that's my first solution. And my second solution, what minus 2 gives me 0? Positive 2. Now, I want to show you guys how you can check your work. Now, I'm going to erase this here in just a second, but you guys can check your work by plugging those numbers back into the original equation. So let's just plug in -8 here. Where we see an x, we're going to put a -8. So -8 squared plus 6 times -8 minus 16. I want that to equal 0. What is -8 squared? All right, what's 6 times -8? -48. All right, does that equal 0? 64 minus 48 minus 16. All right, if that works, then that checks out. The same thing, if we plug in our solution of 2 in for x to the original, 2 squared plus 6 times 2 minus 16, that also has to be 0. 4 plus 12 minus 16, does that check out? So every single time you solve these, you can always plug those back in and double check. Now, we got 15 minutes left. I have one more type and then we're done. I promise tomorrow the notes won't take as long. Today's kind of a lot of information and then tomorrow we'll condense it down a little bit. Oh, I have it up there. All right, so for our last set, you're going to see something just a little bit different on the equations. All right, so these you'll still need to factor. But these are not going to be equal to 0 to start with. And not just 2. So those have to match. But if you take out an 8, that'll be a 2, and then you'll have your matches. Now, this is something that's just going, just kind of a memorization thing. Anytime we are solving equations with x squared, we're actually going to learn another way to solve equations as well besides factoring. But this is a common thing. You do have to have all of these set equal to 0 in order to solve. The reason why is there's no rules to multiply to -2. There's tons of ways to multiply to -2. That's not going to be helpful. Multiplying to get 0 is a pretty simple rule, and it allows us to split those up into the factors and make it a little bit easier to solve. It gets messy if we don't set it equal to 0. So I actually want this to be equal to 0. So how could I move this -2 over? Would I add it or subtract it? All right, we're going to add it, and here we do have a like term. So where am I going to add it to? Yep, just to that 6. So we're actually going to factor b squared plus 6b plus 8 equals 0. So what multiplies to 8 and adds to 6? 4 and 2. So that's what we're going to split up. So 4b plus 2b would give me 6, but it would still multiply to the 8. All right, so my first group, b squared and 4b, the common factor is a b, and I'm left with b plus 4. What about the second group? What's in common?
2.
A 2. And if I take those out, do I also get b plus 4? Just say that's the goal. We always want those to match. So we have b plus 2 and b plus 4. And again, it doesn't matter the order of those, which one goes first. When you're multiplying, the order doesn't matter, that's fine. And those equal 0. So for this first factor, what value of b would give me 0 there? This first one, b plus 2.
Oh,
If, you probably had the 4 first, that's okay. And then for this second factor, what would my solution be? -4. If you guys can see, if you're okay with mentally telling me those answers once it's factored, that's fine with me. So I do have one more for you to do, and I want you to try this one on your own. Alright, so the first thing we need to know is I want this to be equal to 0. So how do I move the -36 over? We're just going to add it. Now, is there a common term here to add it to? Can I add it to an r squared or an r? So it's just going to be its own term at the end. R squared minus 13r plus 36. And then I'm going to give you guys some time to solve that from there.